The wagon wheel hit a rock, and Penelope Lancaster went flying off the back like a sack of flour tossed by an impatient baker. She landed hard in the dusty Colorado road, her green traveling dress billowing around her, one boot flying clean off her foot to land several yards away. The merchants and townsfolk who had been walking alongside the wagon train burst into laughter, and old Mrs. Henderson wheezed between chuckles, "Lord have mercy, that girl is clumsy as a newborn foal." Penelope pushed herself up on her elbows, her face burning hotter than the August sun beating down on them. Dirt covered her from head to toe, and she could taste grit between her teeth. This was the third time she had fallen since they had left Denver 2 days ago, and the teasing was getting worse with each mishap. Her aunt would be mortified when she finally arrived in Palisade, assuming Penelope survived the journey without breaking her neck. Before she could attempt to stand, a shadow fell across her, blocking out the sun. She looked up and up, past worn leather boots, past buckskin pants that strained against muscular thighs, past a broad chest covered in a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms thick with muscle and bronzed by the sun, until she finally met a pair of intense gray eyes set in a face that looked like it had been carved from the very mountains that surrounded them. "You hurt?" The voice was deep, rumbling like distant thunder across the peaks. No, I do not think so," Penelope managed, her breath catching not from the fall, but from the sheer presence of the man towering above her. His dark brown hair fell past his shoulders, tied back loosely with a leather cord, and a thick beard covered his jaw. He looked wild, untamed, like he belonged more to the wilderness than to civilization. Without waiting for further response, he bent down and scooped her up as if she weighed nothing at all. His hands were calloused and warm, one supporting her back and the other beneath her knees. Penelope let out a small gasp and instinctively grabbed his shirt, her fingers clutching the rough fabric. Up close, she could smell pine and leather, and something else, something earthy and masculine that made her head spin more than the fall had. "I can walk," she protested weakly, though she made no real effort to escape his hold. "Sure you can," he said, and she detected the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. He carried her to the side of the road where a fallen log provided a makeshift seat and set her down with surprising gentleness. "Stay put." He strode over to where her boot lay in the middle of the road, picked it up, and returned to her. Then, to her complete astonishment, he knelt before her, took her stockinged foot in his large hand, and slid the boot back on with a care that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. "Thank you," Penelope whispered, suddenly unable to find her voice. He nodded once, rose to his full height, which had to be well over 6 feet, and walked back toward a massive horse that stood waiting patiently by the tree line. The animal was as impressive as its owner, a bay stallion with intelligent eyes and a coat that gleamed in the sunlight. "Wait!" Penelope called out, standing too quickly and immediately wobbling. His hand shot out and steadied her before she could fall again, his reflexes lightning fast. "I do not even know your name." "Ethan Northwood," he said simply. "I am Penelope Lancaster. Are you traveling with the wagon train?" He shook his head. "Heading up to my cabin in the mountains. Just came down for supplies." His eyes swept over the wagon train, then back to her. "Palisade?" "Yes, I'm going to live with my aunt there. She runs a boarding house." Something shifted in his expression, though she could not quite read it. "Martha Lancaster? You know her?" "Everyone knows Martha. Good woman." He released her arm slowly, as if testing whether she would remain upright. "Watch your step, Miss Lancaster. Roads get rougher from here." Before Penelope could respond, he swung up onto his horse with easy grace and rode off, disappearing into the pine trees that lined the road. She stood staring after him long after he had vanished, her heart beating strangely fast in her chest. "That was Ethan Northwood," said a voice beside her. Penelope turned to find a young woman about her own age, with blonde hair and friendly blue eyes. "I am Caroline Morris. My husband and I are heading to Palisade, too." "Is he well known in these parts?" Caroline nodded enthusiastically. "Oh yes, though he keeps to himself mostly. Lives up in the mountains, traps and hunts, brings down pelts and meat to sell in town every few months. They say he can track anything that moves, and once fought off a mountain lion with just a knife." She leaned in conspiratorially. All the unmarried women in Palisade have tried to catch his eye, but he never pays them any mind, just does his business and heads back up into the wilderness. Penelope tried to ignore the strange flutter in her stomach at the mention of unmarried women pursuing Ethan. She had only just met the man, and only because she had embarrassed herself by falling off a wagon. He seems very capable. That he is. Carolyn linked her arm through Penelope's and guided her back toward the wagon train, which was beginning to move again. But you had better be careful, honey. Those mountains have a way of keeping what they claim, and Ethan Northwood is about as mountain as a man can get. Now come on, let me introduce you to my husband Thomas, and you can ride in our wagon. It has better springs, and you will be less likely to go tumbling off. The rest of the journey to Palisade passed without further incident, though Penelope found her thoughts drifting to gray eyes and strong hands more often than she cared to admit. Caroline chattered pleasantly about the town, explaining that it sat in a valley along the Colorado River, surrounded by mesas and mountains, with orchards that would soon be heavy with peaches and apples. The land was still raw and wild, settled barely 15 years ago, but it was growing. There was a main street with a general store, a saloon, a small church, a blacksmith, and her Aunt Martha's boarding house, which also served meals to locals. When they finally rolled into Palisade 3 days after leaving Denver, Penelope was dusty, sore, and more than ready to plant her feet on solid ground. The town was smaller than she had imagined, just a handful of buildings clustered together with houses scattered beyond, but the setting was breathtaking. Red rock formations rose in the distance, and the river sparkled in the afternoon light. Mountains loomed on all sides, their peaks still touched with snow even in late summer. Aunt Martha was waiting on the porch of the boarding house, a tall, sturdy woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She swept Penelope into a fierce hug the moment she climbed down from the wagon, and only then did Penelope realize how much she had needed that embrace. "Let me look at you," Martha said, holding her at arm's length. "You have your mother's eyes. Lord, how I miss my sister." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. Her mother had died 6 months ago, taken by pneumonia during a harsh Boston winter, and her father had followed just 2 months later, his heart simply giving out from grief. At 21 years old, Penelope had found herself alone in the world except for this aunt she had never met, who had immediately written and insisted she come west. "I'm so grateful you took me in," Penelope said softly. "Nonsense. You are family. This is your home now." Martha picked up one of Penelope's bags as if it weighed nothing. "Come inside. I have a room all ready for you, and supper will be on the table in an hour. You can meet the boarders then." The boarding house was neat and clean, if simple, with whitewashed walls and sturdy furniture built to last. Penelope's room was on the second floor, small but comfortable, with a window that overlooked the main street. She unpacked her few belongings, washed the travel dust from her face and hands, and changed into a fresh dress of pale blue cotton. When she came downstairs, she found the dining room filled with people. There were 2 miners, brothers named Jack and Samuel, who worked a claim up in the hills, a scholarly man named Mr. Peterson, who was writing a book about the geology of the region, a widow named Mrs. Chen, who did laundry and mending, and a young cowboy named Billy, who worked at one of the nearby ranches. They all welcomed Penelope warmly, and the meal was hearty and delicious, but she found herself distracted, her mind wandering to a certain mountain man. Over the following weeks, Penelope settled into life in Palisade. She helped Aunt Martha with the cooking and cleaning, served meals to the boarders, and began to make friends in town. Carolyn Morris introduced her around, and soon she knew the shopkeepers, the minister's wife, and most of the other young women her age. They were kind, if a bit curious about the Eastern girl who had come west, and they included her in their sewing circles and church socials. But Penelope could not quite shake her natural clumsiness. She tripped over her own feet at least once a day. She dropped dishes, stumbled on stairs, and once fell directly into the horse trough on Main Street, emerging soaked and mortified while half the town looked on. The teasing was good-natured, but constant. "Clumsy as a newborn foal," old Mr. Henderson said with a chuckle, helping her out of the trough. "That girl could trip over air itself," added Mrs. Yates from the general store. Penelope tried to laugh along, but sometimes, alone in her room at night, she felt the weight of being different, of not quite fitting in. In Boston, she had been able to hide behind social conventions and structured days. Here, where life was rougher and more physical, her lack of grace was on constant display. September arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color to the aspens on the mountain slopes. Penelope was walking back from the general store one afternoon, her arms full of supplies for the boarding house, when her foot caught on an uneven board in the sidewalk. She pitched forward, certain she was about to land face first in the dirt and scatter flour and sugar all over Main Street. Instead, strong arms caught her, steadying her before she could fall. The supplies shifted but did not drop, held secure by those same capable hands. "Careful," rumbled a familiar deep voice. Penelope looked up into gray eyes she had not seen since that day on the road over a month ago. Her heart did a strange little skip. "Mr. Northwood." "Miss Lancaster." He made sure she had her balance before releasing her, though his hands lingered a moment longer than strictly necessary. He looked exactly as she remembered, all muscle and wildness barely contained, though his beard was neatly trimmed and his hair still damp as if he had recently bathed. "Still finding ways to meet the ground, I see." She felt her face flush. "I seem to have a talent for it. A dangerous talent in this country." His eyes were serious now, searching her face. "You could get hurt." "I'm more careful in the mountains than in town," she said, then immediately wondered why she felt the need to defend herself to this man. "You go into the mountains?" Something flickered in his expression, though whether it was concern or disapproval, she could not tell. "Just short walks, gathering wildflowers, nothing too adventurous." He was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "If you are going to walk those trails, you need proper boots. Those city shoes will get you killed." He gestured to her delicate leather boots, which were indeed showing significant wear from the rough terrain. "I cannot exactly afford new boots at the moment," Penelope admitted. She was helping Aunt Martha at the boarding house in exchange for room and board, but she had no income of her own, and her pride would not let her ask her aunt for money for something so practical. Ethan studied her face for another long moment, then said, "Come with me." Before she could protest, he took the supplies from her arms, carrying them as easily as if they weighed nothing, and began walking down the street. Penelope hurried to keep up with his long strides. He led her to a small shop she had not noticed before, tucked between the blacksmith and a building that appeared to be someone's home. The sign above the door read, "Cobbler and Leatherwork." Inside, an older man with a weathered face looked up from his workbench. "Ethan, good to see you, son. You need something repaired?" "Tom, this is Miss Lancaster. She needs boots, proper mountain boots." Ethan set Penelope's supplies on the counter. "Can you fix her up?" Tom came around the counter and studied Penelope's feet with a professional eye. "Sure can. I will need to take measurements, and it will take about a week to make them proper." "Good." Ethan pulled out a leather pouch from his belt and counted out coins onto the counter. "Wait," Penelope protested. "I cannot let you pay for my boots." "Consider it a loan," Ethan said, his tone brooking no argument. "Pay me back when you can, but you are not going into the mountains in those city shoes. I would not be able to live with myself if you got hurt because you did not have proper gear." The way he said it, with such simple certainty, made Penelope's protests die on her lips. She nodded slowly. "Thank you. I will pay you back, I promise." "I know you will." He turned to Tom. "Make them sturdy. She's got a talent for finding trouble." Tom chuckled and began taking measurements of Penelope's feet, and she tried not to think about how this was the second time Ethan Northwood had handled her feet, albeit indirectly. When the measurements were complete, Ethan picked up her supplies again and carried them back to the boarding house for her, refusing to let her take them despite her insistence that she could manage. At the door of the boarding house, he set the packages down and tipped his hat to her. "Stay out of trouble, Miss Lancaster." "I make no promises," she found herself saying, surprising herself with the teasing note in her voice. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "I figured as much." Then he was gone, striding back down the street toward where his horse was tied, leaving Penelope standing on the porch with a racing heart and a head full of questions. Aunt Martha appeared in the doorway, her shrewd eyes moving from Penelope to Ethan's retreating form. "Was that Ethan Northwood?" "Yes, I nearly fell and he caught me. Then he bought me new boots." Martha's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Did he now? That is interesting." "It is not what you think. He said it was a loan." Ethan Northwood does not do things halfway, Martha said thoughtfully. If he is looking after you, that means something. That man has not shown interest in a woman in all the years I've been here. He is not interested in me, Penelope said, but her voice lacked conviction. He just does not want me to break my neck in the mountains. Martha did not look convinced, but she let the matter drop and helped Penelope carry the supplies inside. Over the next week, Penelope found herself watching for Ethan, though she tried to tell herself it was foolish. He had probably already returned to his cabin in the mountains and would not come down again for months. But then she would catch herself looking up every time the door to the boarding house opened or scanning the street whenever she went into town, hoping for a glimpse of that tall, broad-shouldered form. Caroline teased her mercilessly when she heard about the boots. I told you, that man has never paid special attention to any woman before. This is significant, Penelope. He was being kind, that is all. Ethan Northwood is many things, but he is not the kind of man who does things just to be kind to pretty girls. If he is looking after you, it is because he wants to. Penelope wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Deep down, she hoped Caroline was right, even though the very idea terrified her. What did she know about mountain men? What did she know about the West at all? She was a city girl, born and raised in Boston, educated in a proper finishing school. She had no business thinking romantic thoughts about a man who belonged more to the wilderness than to civilization. But her heart did not seem to care about such practical considerations. On the day she was supposed to pick up her new boots, Penelope walked to Tom's shop with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The boots were beautiful, sturdy leather that reached mid-calf with thick soles and proper laces. They fit perfectly, and when she walked in them, she felt more grounded than she ever had in her delicate city footwear. Ethan told me to make them right, Tom said with pride. These will last you years if you care for them properly. Penelope paid him the small additional fee for some waterproofing treatment he had applied, then wore her new boots out of the shop carrying her old ones in a package. She felt taller somehow, more capable, even though she knew that was ridiculous. Boots could not change who she was. She was so busy looking down at her new footwear that she did not see the person coming around the corner until she walked straight into him. She stumbled backward, arms windmilling, certain she was going to land on her backside in the middle of the street yet again. And once again, strong hands caught her, steadying her before she could fall. You really do need someone to watch over you, Ethan said, and this time there was definite amusement in his voice. Penelope looked up at him, flustered and embarrassed and absurdly happy to see him. I was distracted. I can see that. He was looking at her new boots, and something like satisfaction crossed his rugged features. They fit well? Perfectly. Thank you again. I have already started setting aside money to pay you back. He waved that away with one large hand. No hurry. I'm just glad you will be safer now. He paused, seeming to struggle with something, then said in a rush, I'm heading back up to my cabin tomorrow. Winter comes early in the high country, and I need to finish preparing, but I will be back down before the first snow, probably early November. Maybe when I come back, you would let me take you to supper. At the hotel dining room, if you want. Penelope's heart leaped. The hotel dining room was the nicest place to eat in Palisade, reserved for special occasions and courting couples. I would like that very much. Relief washed over his face, making him look younger, less weathered. Good. That's good. He cleared his throat. Until November then, Miss Lancaster. Penelope, she said impulsively. Please call me Penelope. Penelope. Her name sounded different on his lips, rougher and somehow more real. I'm Ethan. I know, she said softly. They stood there in the middle of the street just looking at each other until someone cleared their throat loudly behind them. Ethan stepped back, tipping his hat to her once more, and then he was gone, disappearing around the corner as if he had never been there at all. Penelope walked back to the boarding house in a daze. November seemed impossibly far away. The weeks that followed were both the slowest and the fastest of Penelope's life. She threw herself into her work at the boarding house, learning to cook the hearty meals that the boarders preferred, scrubbing floors until they gleamed, and helping Aunt Martha with the endless laundry that came with housing 6 people. She still stumbled and dropped things with alarming regularity, but her new boots gave her more confidence when she walked, and she found herself falling less often, at least when she was wearing them. She also began taking longer walks on the trails around Palisade, always making sure to tell Aunt Martha where she was going and when she would be back. The mountains called to her in a way she had never expected, and she found peace in the sound of the wind through the pines and the sight of hawks circling overhead. She understood a little better why Ethan chose to live up there, away from the noise and bustle of even a small town like Palisade. October arrived with a flourish of gold and red as the aspens turned, painting the mountainsides in brilliant color. The orchards around Palisade were heavy with fruit, and Penelope helped with the harvest, working alongside the other women to pick and preserve peaches, apples, and pears for the winter ahead. Her hands grew rough with work, her skin tanned despite her best efforts to wear a bonnet, and she felt herself changing in ways that had nothing to do with her appearance. She was becoming stronger, more capable, more confident. She was learning to live in this wild country, to adapt to its demands and find joy in its harsh beauty. And through it all, thoughts of Ethan lingered in the back of her mind like a sweet secret she hugged close to her heart. Caroline invited her to a dance at the church hall one Saturday evening in mid-October, and Penelope almost declined before deciding that moping around waiting for November would not make the time pass any faster. She wore her best dress, a deep green silk that had belonged to her mother, and let Caroline arrange her auburn hair in an elaborate style that made her feel almost pretty. The hall was crowded with people from Palisade and the surrounding ranches, and the music was lively, if somewhat rough. Penelope danced with Billy, the young cowboy who boarded at Aunt Martha's, and with several other young men who asked politely. She was having a reasonably good time despite her tendency to step on her partner's toes when the doors opened and Ethan walked in. He looked completely out of place in his buckskins among the men in their Sunday best, but he did not seem to care. His eyes scanned the room until they found Penelope, and then he was moving through the crowd toward her with that same purposeful stride she remembered. "You are supposed to be in the mountains," she said when he reached her, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "I was." He glanced around at the curious faces watching them, then back to her. "But I could not stop thinking about you up there. Figured I would come down early, make sure you were all right." The honesty in his voice took her breath away. Around them, she could hear the whispers starting, but she did not care. "I have been well, though I have missed talking to you." "Dance with me," he said, and it was not quite a question. She placed her hand in his, and he led her onto the floor just as a slower song began. He held her properly, respectfully, but she could feel the strength in his hands, the solid warmth of him. They moved together, and for once Penelope did not stumble, did not trip over her own feet. It was as if his presence steadied her, grounded her in a way nothing else ever had. "You are different," he said quietly, his eyes searching her face. "Stronger." "This country changes people," she replied. "I am not the same woman who fell off that wagon in August." "No," he agreed, "but you are still clumsy as a newborn foal." She laughed, surprising herself. "I suppose some things never change." "I do not mind," he said, and the tenderness in his voice made her throat tight. "Gives me an excuse to catch you." They danced 2 more songs before propriety demanded they separate, but Ethan did not leave the hall. He stood against the wall, his eyes following Penelope wherever she went, and no other man dared ask her to dance after that. When the evening ended, he walked her back to the boarding house, the two of them moving slowly through the cool October night. "Will you stay in town for a while?" Penelope asked when they reached the porch. "A few days. I need to get some supplies, talk to the trader about my furs." He hesitated, then added, "And I wanted to spend some time with you, get to know you better, if that is all right." "That's more than all right." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, and Penelope felt something shift in her chest, settling into place like a key turning in a lock. True to his word, Ethan spent the next 3 days in Palisade, and Penelope saw him every day. He took her on walks along the river, showing her how to identify animal tracks and edible plants. He taught her which berries were safe and which would make her sick, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to move quietly through the forest. And they talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their lives. She learned that he had come west when he was 18, running from a tragedy in his past that he did not elaborate on, and she did not push. He had spent years learning the mountains, making mistakes and surviving them, until the wilderness had become his home in a way no town ever could. He was 32 now, weathered by sun and wind and hard living, but there was a gentleness in him that most people never saw. He learned that she had been a disappointment to her Boston society mother for most of her life, too clumsy for proper dancing, too curious about books and ideas, too outspoken for a well-bred young lady. That her parents had loved her despite her shortcomings, and that their deaths had broken something in her that she was only now beginning to heal. That she had been terrified to come west, but also, secretly, relieved to escape the confines of a life that had never quite fit. "You belong here," Ethan said on their last walk before he had to return to his cabin. They were standing on a bluff overlooking the valley, the late afternoon sun turning everything golden. "In this country, I mean. You have got the spirit for it, even if you have not found your footing yet." "I still fall down at least twice a day," Penelope pointed out. "You get back up every time." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "That's what matters in the West, not whether you fall, but whether you keep getting up." She met his eyes, saw something in them that made her breath catch. "Ethan." "I know it is too soon," he said, taking a step closer. "I know you have only been here a few months, and we have only just started getting to know each other, but I need to say this before I lose my nerve. I've been alone for a long time, Penelope. Chosen to be alone because I never met anyone who made me want to be anything else, until you fell off that wagon and looked up at me with dirt on your face and fire in your eyes." Penelope's heart was racing now, her whole body trembling. "I have never met anyone like you either. I did not know men like you existed outside of books." "I am no hero," he said roughly. "I am just a man who lives in the mountains and sells furs to get by. I cannot offer you fancy things or an easy life. My cabin is small and the winters are hard, and you would be miles from town most of the year." "Are you asking me something?" Penelope whispered. "Not yet." He raised one hand and cupped her cheek, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "But I am going to. When I come back down in November, I am going to ask you properly. I just wanted you to know, so you can think about it. Think about whether you could be happy with a man like me, in a place like that." "I do not need to think about it," Penelope said, her voice stronger now. "I already know my answer. Tell me anyway when I come back. Give yourself time to be sure." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, gentle despite his rough exterior. "You deserve someone who can give you everything." "I do not want everything," she said fiercely. "I want you." His eyes darkened, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her, but instead he stepped back, letting his hand fall away. "November," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I will be back in November, and we will talk properly then." He left the next morning before dawn, and Penelope watched from her window as he rode out of town, his figure growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared into the pine trees. The house felt emptier without him. The whole town felt emptier, and she understood with crystal clarity that she had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with Ethan Northwood. The next few weeks dragged by with agonizing slowness. Penelope went about her duties mechanically, her mind always half in the mountains, wondering what Ethan was doing, whether he was safe, whether he was thinking of her as constantly as she thought of him. Aunt Martha watched her with knowing eyes, but said nothing, just gave her extra tasks to keep her busy and occasionally patted her shoulder in wordless sympathy. Caroline was not so restrained. "You have got it bad," she declared one afternoon when they were working together in the boarding house kitchen, peeling potatoes for dinner. "That man has completely captured your heart." "Is it that obvious?" "Only to anyone with eyes," Caroline grinned. "But I'm happy for you, truly. Ethan's a good man, even if he's a bit rough around the edges, and the way he looks at you, like you are the only thing in the world that matters, well, that is something special." "What if he changes his mind?" Penelope voiced the fear that had been nagging at her. "What if he gets back to his cabin and realizes that he does not want to be tied down after all?" "That is not going to happen," Caroline said firmly. "I have lived here for 3 years, and I have never seen Ethan act the way he acts around you. He is smitten, Penelope. Absolutely smitten." Penelope wanted to believe her, but doubt was a persistent companion. She was clumsy, impractical, a city girl who barely knew how to survive in the wilderness. What if Ethan realized that she would be more burden than help in his mountain cabin? What if he came to resent her inability to do simple tasks without falling over her own feet? The first snow came in early November, light flurries that dusted the mountains but melted by afternoon in the valley. Penelope stood on the porch of the boarding house, watching the fat flakes drift down, and wondered if Ethan was watching the same snow from his cabin. The urge to see him was a physical ache in her chest, so strong it almost hurt. 2 days later, on a crisp morning with frost covering the ground, Penelope was carrying water from the pump behind the boarding house when her boot hit a patch of ice. Her feet flew out from under her and she went down hard, the bucket flying from her hands and water splashing everywhere. She lay there for a moment, stunned and bruised, staring up at the cloudless blue sky. And then Ethan's face appeared above her, his expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. You would think by now you would learn to watch where you are going. "You are back," Penelope breathed, and suddenly the pain from her fall did not matter at all. "I'm back." He scooped her up off the frozen ground, cradling her against his chest. "And you are half frozen. How long have you been lying here?" "Only a minute. I just fell." "Of course you did." But there was no mockery in his voice, only affection. He carried her inside, calling out for Martha, who appeared from the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands. "Ethan Northwood, what did you do to my niece?" "Nothing. She fell on the ice. I just found her." He set Penelope down in a chair by the fire, then crouched in front of her, his hands running over her arms and legs with professional efficiency. "Anything broken? Does anything hurt badly?" "I am fine," Penelope insisted, though she could already feel bruises forming. "Just clumsy as always." "Clumsy as a newborn foal," Aunt Martha said, but her tone was fond. She brought over a blanket and draped it around Penelope's shoulders. "I will make tea. Ethan, you staying for breakfast?" "If you are offering." "I am. Lord knows this girl needs someone to keep her upright." Martha disappeared back into the kitchen, and Penelope realized with some amusement that her aunt was deliberately giving them privacy. Ethan pulled up another chair and sat down facing her, his knees almost touching hers. His eyes were serious, searching her face. "I have been thinking about you every day since I left." "I have been thinking about you too," Penelope admitted. "The cabin was too quiet. I kept expecting to hear your voice, kept turning around, thinking you would be there." He reached out and took her hands in his calloused fingers gentle. "I have lived alone for 14 years, Penelope, and I was content with it. But 3 days in your company ruined me for solitude. I do not want to go back up there without you." "Then do not," she whispered. "Is that your answer? You have thought about what I said, about what life would be like?" "I have thought about nothing else." Penelope squeezed his hands. "I know it will be hard. I know I'm not practical or skilled in the ways that a mountain wife should be. I will probably burn dinner and fall down and be a terrible burden to you." "You could never be a burden." "Let me finish." She took a deep breath. "I am not perfect, Ethan. I will never be graceful or elegant or any of the things a proper woman should be. But I am strong in other ways. I learn quickly, and I do not give up, and I love you with my whole heart. If you can accept me as I am, with all my flaws, then yes. My answer is yes." The smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I do not want you to change. I love you exactly as you are. Your clumsiness, your stubbornness, your courage, all of it." He stood, pulling her up with him, and suddenly his arms were around her, and she was pressed against the solid warmth of his chest. "I will catch you every time you fall, Penelope. For the rest of our lives, I will catch you." And then he was kissing her, and Penelope felt her whole world narrow down to this moment, this man, this feeling of coming home. His lips were warm despite the cold morning, his beard softer than she had expected, and she melted into him, her arms winding around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Soon. I do not want to wait." "Neither do I." "Good." He kissed her again, quick and fierce. "I will talk to the minister today, see how soon he can do it, and I need to get you a ring, and we will need supplies for the winter, enough for 2, and I should probably fix up the cabin, make it more comfortable for you." Penelope laughed at his sudden nervous energy. "Ethan, stop. The cabin is fine. I do not need a fancy ring. All I need is you." "You are going to get more than that," he said stubbornly. I might be a mountain man, but I know how to take care of my wife." The word wife sent a thrill through her. His wife. She was going to be Ethan Northwood's wife. Aunt Martha returned with tea and breakfast, and over the meal they made plans. The minister could perform the ceremony in 3 days, giving them time to get the necessary supplies and make preparations. Penelope would wear her mother's green silk dress, and Caroline had already agreed to stand up with her. Ethan would wear his best clothes, which meant buckskins that were only slightly worn, and a clean shirt. It was not going to be a fancy Boston wedding with hundreds of guests and elaborate decorations. But as Penelope looked across the table at Ethan, saw the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at her, felt the solid certainty of his presence, she knew it would be perfect. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Penelope helped Aunt Martha prepare food for a small celebration after the ceremony. Caroline and the other women in town put together gifts for the newlyweds, practical things like blankets and cookware and preserved food. Tom the cobbler gave Penelope a pair of fur-lined moccasins for wearing in the cabin. Even the boarders contributed, with the miners donating some gold dust and Mr. Peterson gifting a beautiful leather-bound journal for Penelope to record her new life. Ethan spent his time gathering supplies, buying everything they would need to get through the winter in the high country. He also made 2 trips up to his cabin, the first to clean and prepare it, the second to bring down some of his furs to sell for extra money. He bought Penelope a simple gold ring from a trader passing through town, and though it was not fancy, it fit her finger perfectly, and she loved it more than the grandest diamond. On the morning of the wedding, Penelope woke early and stood at her window, watching the sun rise over the mountains. In a few hours, she would be married. In a few days, she would leave Palisade and go up into those mountains with Ethan, beginning a life so different from anything she had ever imagined that it still felt like a dream. But it was not a dream. It was real, solid, as real as the mountains themselves. Aunt Martha helped her dress, arranging her hair and fastening her mother's pearl necklace around her throat. "You look beautiful," Martha said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Your mother would be so proud of you." "Do you think I am making a mistake?" Penelope asked suddenly, "marrying a man I have known for such a short time, moving to a cabin in the wilderness?" "I think you are doing exactly what your heart tells you to do," Martha said firmly, "and that is never a mistake. Ethan is a good man, Penelope. He will take care of you and you will take care of him. That is what marriage is." The ceremony was held in the small church at noon, with what seemed like half the town crammed into the pews. Penelope walked down the aisle on Aunt Martha's arm, her eyes fixed on Ethan, where he stood at the altar looking uncomfortable in his formal clothes, but more handsome than any man had a right to be. His face lit up when he saw her, and she felt her own face break into a huge smile. The minister performed the ceremony with simple dignity, speaking of love and commitment and the journey they were beginning together. When it came time for the vows, Ethan's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love and cherish her for all their days. Penelope's voice shook slightly, but she got through her own vows without stumbling over the words, which felt like a small miracle. And then Ethan was sliding the ring onto her finger, and she was sliding a simple gold band onto his, and the minister was pronouncing them husband and wife. Ethan kissed her in front of everyone, a kiss that was tender and possessive and full of promise, and the church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration afterward was held in the church hall with food and music and dancing. Penelope danced with her new husband, and this time when she stumbled, he caught her smoothly and kept right on dancing as if nothing had happened. She danced with Billy and Mr. Peterson and even old Mr. Henderson, who told her she was the prettiest bride Palisade had ever seen. But through it all, she was acutely aware of Ethan watching her, waiting for her, and as the afternoon wore on, she found herself more and more ready to leave the party and begin their life together. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, Ethan came to her and said quietly, "Ready to go home?" Home. His cabin in the mountains was her home now. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." They said their goodbyes, accepting congratulations and well wishes from what felt like everyone in town. Aunt Martha hugged Penelope fiercely and whispered, "You come visit in the spring, you hear me? I want to know how you are doing." "I promise," Penelope said, her throat tight with emotion. Ethan had 2 horses waiting, his big bay stallion and a gentler mare that he had bought specifically for Penelope. He helped her mount, showing her how to sit properly in the saddle, and she was grateful for the riding lessons Caroline had given her over the past few weeks. They rode out of Palisade as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and Penelope did not look back. The trail climbed steadily into the mountains, winding through pine forests and across rushing streams. It was cold this high up, and Penelope was glad for the warm cloak Aunt Martha had insisted she take. The journey took several hours, and by the time they reached Ethan's cabin, full darkness had fallen and the stars were brilliant overhead. The cabin was larger than Penelope had expected, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Smoke rose from the chimney, and when Ethan opened the door, warmth spilled out. He had come up the day before and prepared everything, building up the fire and making sure the cabin was comfortable. Inside was one large room with a sleeping area in one corner, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove in another, and a sitting area with 2 comfortable chairs by the fireplace. Furs covered the floor and hung on the walls, adding warmth and beauty. It was simple but cozy, a place that felt like a real home despite its rough construction. Ethan took care of the horses while Penelope explored her new home, running her hands over the furniture Ethan had built with his own hands, examining the neat shelves of supplies, touching the quilts on the bed. When he came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, she turned to him with a smile. "It is perfect," she said. "You have not even spent a night here yet," he pointed out, but she could see he was pleased. "It does not matter. It is perfect because it is yours." "Ours," she corrected herself. He crossed to her in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a hunger that took her breath away. "Mine," he agreed against her lips, "my wife, my Penelope." "Your clumsy, disaster-prone Penelope," she said with a laugh. "My perfect Penelope." He swept her up into his arms and carried her to the bed, and Penelope stopped thinking about anything else for a long while. Later, as they lay together under the warm quilts, listening to the wind whisper through the pines outside, Ethan traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Are you scared?" he asked quietly. "Of what?" "Living here, being so far from town. Winter is coming, and we will be snowed in for months. No one to talk to but me, no help if something goes wrong." Penelope considered this. She probably should be scared. She was a city girl, raised in comfort and civilization, now living in a one-room cabin miles from the nearest neighbor, but all she felt was peace. "I'm not scared," she said. "As long as I am with you, I'm not scared of anything." He tightened his arms around her. "I will take care of you, Penelope. I promise. I will teach you everything you need to know to survive here, and I will keep you safe." "I know you will." She snuggled closer to his warmth. "But you have to promise me something in return." "Anything. Promise you will let me help. Let me be a partner, not just someone you have to protect. I want to learn and grow stronger. I want to be worthy of this life." "You are already worthy." But he nodded against her hair. "I promise. We will be partners in everything." The winter that followed was both harder and more wonderful than Penelope could have imagined. The snow started falling in late November and did not stop until April. Some days it was impossible to even open the door because the drifts were so high, and Ethan had to tunnel through to reach the shed where they kept the horses and supplies. But Ethan was a patient teacher, and Penelope was a determined student. He taught her how to cook over the wood stove, how to make bread and stew and johnny cakes. He showed her how to tan hides, how to mend clothes and make new ones from buckskin, how to preserve meat and ration supplies so they would last until spring. He taught her to shoot, spending hours helping her practice with his rifle until she could hit a target more often than not. And she fell down, constantly. She tripped over the threshold, slipped on icy patches near the door, stumbled over her own feet while carrying wood. But every single time, Ethan was there to catch her, his strong hands steady and sure, his voice amused but never mocking. "You really are clumsy as a newborn foal," he said one afternoon, after she had tripped over absolutely nothing and he had caught her before she could face plant into the woodpile. "I know," she sighed. "I'm sorry. You must get tired of constantly saving me from myself." "Never." He set her back on her feet and kissed her forehead. "I like catching you. Gives me an excuse to hold you." Despite her clumsiness, Penelope grew stronger and more capable as the winter progressed. She learned to read the weather, to anticipate storms by the behavior of the animals and the feel of the air. She learned to move quietly through the snow, to track rabbits and deer, to set snares. She learned to love the silence of the mountains, broken only by the whisper of wind and the call of birds. And she learned what it meant to be truly loved by a good man. Ethan was patient with her mistakes, supportive of her efforts, passionate in his affection. He talked to her, really talked, sharing his thoughts and dreams in a way he said he had never done with anyone else. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud from the books she had brought, playing cards, and just enjoying each other's company. By the time spring arrived, bringing green shoots pushing through the melting snow and the return of birdsong, Penelope felt like a different person from the city girl who had fallen off a wagon the previous August. She was tanned and strong, her hands calloused from work, her body lean and healthy. She could shoot straight, cook a decent meal, and survive in the wilderness. She still fell down regularly, but she had learned to laugh about it, to pick herself up, and to appreciate the strong arms that were always ready to catch her. In late April, when the trails were finally passable again, they rode down to Palisade together. The town greeted them with joy, and Aunt Martha cried when she saw how healthy and happy Penelope looked. Caroline squealed and hugged her and demanded to know everything about life in the mountains. "It is hard," Penelope admitted as they sat together in Martha's kitchen, shelling peas for supper. "Harder than anything I have ever done. But I love it, Caroline. I love the mountains, the quiet, the beauty of it all. And I love being with Ethan, just the two of us." "You are glowing," Caroline observed. "Marriage agrees with you." Penelope blushed but did not deny it. Marriage did agree with her, more than she ever could have imagined. They spent a week in Palisade, restocking supplies and visiting with friends. Ethan sold his winter furs and bought gifts for Penelope, including a beautiful set of hairbrushes and a bolt of fabric for making new dresses. They attended church on Sunday, and afterward the minister's wife pulled Penelope aside. "I wanted to tell you," she said quietly, "that you have given hope to a lot of the young women in this town. They see that you found love despite your difficulties, despite being different, and it makes them believe that they can find it too. You are an inspiration, my dear." Penelope was moved to tears by this unexpected kindness. She had never thought of herself as inspiring to anyone. When they finally rode back up into the mountains, heading home to their cabin, Penelope realized that she was eager to return. Palisade was nice to visit, but the mountains were where she belonged now. The cabin, with its one room and simple furnishings, was more home to her than the fancy Boston house she had grown up in had ever been. Summer in the high country was glorious. The meadows exploded with wildflowers, and Penelope spent hours gathering them, learning their names and uses from Ethan. Some could be eaten, some were medicinal, and some were just beautiful. She pressed the prettiest ones in the journal Mr. Peterson had given her, recording her life in words and flowers. Ethan taught her to fish in the crystal-clear mountain streams, and she proved to have a natural talent for it, much to his amusement. They rode together through the high passes, exploring valleys that probably had never seen human footprints before. He showed her beaver ponds and elk herds and a family of foxes that lived near the cabin. They made love under the stars on warm nights, and she fell asleep in his arms, feeling more at peace than she ever had in her life. In July, Penelope began to suspect that she was pregnant. She waited another month to be sure before telling Ethan, worried about how he would react. They had not discussed children, and she did not know if he wanted them. But when she finally worked up the courage to tell him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, his reaction left no doubt. His eyes widened, then filled with such joy that it took her breath away. He pulled her into his lap, holding her carefully as if she might break, his face buried in her hair. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby. Penelope, you have given me everything, everything I never knew I wanted." "You are happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it." He pulled back so he could look at her face. "Are you? This is going to be hard having a baby up here. We should probably go down to Palisade a month or so before the baby comes. Stay with your aunt so you can be near the doctor." "I am incredibly happy," Penelope said. "And yes, we can go to Palisade when the time comes. But I'm not scared, Ethan. Not with you beside me. The rest of the summer and fall passed peacefully. Penelope's belly grew round, and Ethan treated her like spun glass, constantly worried that she would fall and hurt herself or the baby. She did fall, of course, several times, but he was always there to catch her, his hands gentle on her expanding waist. They went down to Palisade in early March, just as the snows were beginning to melt, and took up residence in Aunt Martha's boarding house. The baby came in early April, after a long and difficult labor that had Ethan pacing the hallway like a caged wolf until the doctor finally let him in to meet his son. Penelope held the tiny, perfect baby in her arms and looked up at her husband through exhausted tears. "We have a son." Ethan knelt beside the bed, his rough fingers impossibly gentle as he touched the baby's dark hair. "He is perfect. You are perfect." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you." They named him Samuel, after Ethan's father, and he was a healthy, strong baby who looked like his father with his dark hair and gray eyes. Aunt Martha was beside herself with joy, and Caroline came to visit every day, bringing gifts and advice. They stayed in Palisade for 6 weeks, giving Penelope time to recover and little Samuel time to grow stronger before the journey back to the cabin. Ethan was a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring the baby to Penelope for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just staring at his son with wonder on his face. When they finally returned to the mountains, it felt like coming home. The cabin was exactly as they had left it, and Penelope found that she had missed the solitude, the peace, the sound of wind in the pines. She had worried that having a baby in the wilderness would be difficult, but Samuel adapted easily, sleeping peacefully in the cradle Ethan had built, apparently soothed by the quiet. Life fell into a new rhythm. Penelope still helped with all the work of running their mountain homestead, but now she did it with a baby strapped to her back or sleeping nearby. She still fell down regularly, but Ethan had fashioned a sling that held Samuel securely against her chest, so she never had to worry about dropping him when she tripped. "You are still clumsy as a newborn foal," Ethan said one afternoon, catching her as she stumbled over a root while carrying water from the stream. Samuel was asleep in his sling, completely undisturbed by his mother's near fall. "But at least now you are a clumsy foal with a baby foal of your own." Penelope laughed and kissed him. "And you are still catching me every time I fall." "Always," he promised. "For the rest of our lives, I will always catch you." The years that followed were full of joy and hardship in equal measure. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose, born 2 years after Samuel, and another son named Thomas, born 3 years after that. The cabin was extended to add another room for the children, and Ethan built furniture as each child arrived, crafting cradles and beds and toy chests with his own hands. Penelope never did overcome her clumsiness, and the children learned early to watch out for their mother, who was likely to trip over her own feet at any moment. But they also learned that their father was always there to catch her, and that the love between their parents was something solid and real, a foundation they could build their lives on. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet competence in the wilderness. Rose was bold and adventurous, fearless in a way that terrified Penelope, but made Ethan laugh with pride. Thomas was gentle and thoughtful, always asking questions and wanting to understand how things worked. They went down to Palisade several times a year, keeping in touch with Aunt Martha and Caroline and the other friends they had made. The town grew over the years, adding new buildings and new people, but it never lost its frontier character. Ethan became known as the man to go to when someone was lost in the mountains or when a tracker was needed, and Penelope became known as the mountain man's wife, who could fall down on flat ground, but could also shoot straight and survive anything the wilderness threw at her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Penelope to the same bluff where he had first told her he loved her. The children were staying with Aunt Martha in town, giving them a rare night alone. They sat together watching the sunset, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked quietly. "Giving up your life in the city, marrying a mountain man, living in the wilderness?" "Never," Penelope said firmly. "Not for a single moment. This life, with you, is everything I never knew I wanted. You saved me, Ethan, not just from falling, but from a life that would have suffocated me." "You saved me too," he said. "I was so alone before you, Penelope. I did not even realize how alone until you came into my life. You and the children, you are my whole world." She turned in his arms so she could kiss him properly. "I love you. I have loved you since the moment you picked me up off that dusty road and looked at me like I was something precious instead of something broken." "You were never broken," Ethan said fiercely. "You were just in the wrong place. Here, in these mountains with me, you shine. You are the strongest person I know, and I am so grateful that you chose me." They made love under the stars, just as they had on their first summer together, and Penelope felt the same sense of rightness, of belonging, that she had felt then. This was where she was meant to be. This was her home. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both large and small. The children grew up, Samuel becoming a skilled tracker like his father, Rose marrying a rancher from the valley below, Thomas going to Denver to study engineering but always coming back to visit. Aunt Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, and Penelope mourned her deeply, but was grateful for the years they had shared. Ethan's hair turned gray, then white, but he remained strong and vital, still trapping and hunting in the mountains he loved. Penelope's auburn hair showed streaks of silver, and her face gained lines from years of laughter and sun, but her green eyes still sparkled with the same fire that had caught Ethan's attention all those years ago on a dusty Colorado road. And she still fell down, regularly and spectacularly. But Ethan was always there to catch her, his reflexes still quick despite his age, his hands still strong and sure. It became a joke among their children and grandchildren, the way Grandma Penelope could trip over thin air, and Grandpa Ethan would somehow always be there to catch her before she hit the ground. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a celebration. Samuel had taken over most of the trapping business, working in partnership with his father. Rose had 4 children of her own and another on the way. Thomas had married a woman from Denver and brought her to meet the family, a sweet girl who looked terrified by the wilderness but determined to fit in. After the meal, as everyone sat around talking and laughing, little Emma, Rose's youngest daughter, climbed into Penelope's lap. "Grandma, is it true that you fall down all the time?" "It is very true," Penelope admitted with a laugh. "I am clumsy as a newborn foal, your grandfather always says." "But Grandpa always catches you," Emma said solemnly. "Mama said he has caught you every time you have stumbled for 30 years. "That he has, sweetheart, every single time." "That is because I love your grandmother," Ethan said, reaching over to take Penelope's hand. Even after 30 years, his touch still made her heart skip. "And when you love someone, you catch them when they fall. You help them back up. You stand beside them no matter what. That is what love is." Emma seemed to consider this. "I want someone to catch me when I fall someday." "You will find them," Penelope assured her. "When you are ready, you will find someone who sees you exactly as you are and loves you not despite your flaws but because of them, someone who will always be there to catch you." She met Ethan's eyes across the table, saw the love and contentment there that mirrored her own feelings. They had built something beautiful together, something that would last long after they were gone. A family, a legacy, a love story that their grandchildren would tell their own grandchildren someday. As the sun set over the mountains that had been their home for 30 years, Penelope leaned against Ethan's shoulder and felt complete. She had been so lost when she had first come west, so unsure of who she was or where she belonged. But falling off that wagon, stumbling into Ethan's life, had been the best thing that had ever happened to her. She was clumsy. She always would be. But she had found a man who loved her anyway, who caught her every time she stumbled, who saw her strength instead of her weaknesses. And together, they had built a life in the wild mountains of Colorado that was rich and full and more wonderful than anything she could have imagined in those early days. The stars came out one by one, brilliant against the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. The children eventually went to bed, settling down in the cabin and in tents pitched outside. Ethan and Penelope sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the night deepen. "Happy anniversary," Ethan murmured, kissing her temple. "Happy anniversary," Penelope replied. "Here is to 30 more years of you catching me when I fall." "And 30 more years of falling in love with you every single day," Ethan added. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together in one of the wildest, most beautiful places on earth. Penelope knew that tomorrow she would probably trip over something, and Ethan would be there to catch her. The day after that, and the day after that, for as long as they both lived. That was their story, their truth, their love. And it was perfect.